Staff Sergeant Emma Collins clutched her boarding pass, her tired eyes scanning the bustling terminal at Los Angeles International Airport. After 6 grueling months stationed in Iraq, she was finally on her way home. The weight of her experiences bore down on her, but a small smile appeared as she thought about reuniting with her family. Just then, the announcement echoed through the terminal. Now boarding first class for Flight 562 to Seattle. Emma blinked in surprise. First class? She glanced at her ticket, confirming that yes, she indeed had a first-class seat. Whether it was a mistake or a generous upgrade, she wasn't about to question her good fortune. As she walked down the jet bridge, the echo of her military-issued boots bounced off the walls, each step bringing her closer to the comforts of home. The familiar scent of recycled air greeted her as she entered the plane, filling her nostrils with the typical cabin smell. The first-class area gleamed with polished surfaces and plush seats, a luxurious change from the cramped military transports she had grown accustomed to. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," the flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Your seat is 3A, just to your left." Emma nodded her thanks and made her way to her assigned seat. She stowed her small backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into the comfortable chair, relishing the extra legroom. With a sigh, she allowed herself a brief moment of peace, her eyes drifting shut as the soft hum of conversations and the shuffle of luggage filled the cabin. "Excuse me." A sharp voice interrupted her moment of tranquility. Emma's eyes opened to see a well-dressed man in his late 50s standing in the aisle. His expression was one of irritation, and his gaze lingered on her uniform, taking in the sergeant's stripes on her sleeve. "I believe you're in my seat," he stated. Emma took a steady breath, keeping her voice calm and professional. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is my assigned seat." She reached for her boarding pass to double-check. The man's frown deepened. "There must be some mistake. This is first class," he said, his tone heavy with implication. Emma felt a familiar knot in her stomach. She had encountered this sort of prejudice before, but it never got easier. "I understand, sir," she said, handing him her boarding pass. "As you can see, I've been assigned seat 3A." The man snatched the ticket from her hand, inspecting it with narrowed eyes. Just then, a flight attendant arrived, her smile calm and professional. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, glancing between Emma and the man. "Yes, there certainly is," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "This individual claims to have a first-class ticket. Surely there's been some sort of mix-up." The flight attendant took a look at Emma's boarding pass, then smiled at the man. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. Staff Sergeant Collins is indeed assigned to seat 3A." The man's face flushed. "This is unacceptable," he muttered. "I paid good money for a first-class ticket, and I won't have my flight ruined by—" "Sir," the flight attendant interjected firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Staff Sergeant Collins has a valid first-class ticket and every right to be here. Now, if you'd please find your seat. We need to prepare for takeoff." With a final glare, the man huffed and stomped off to his seat. Emma took a deep breath, willing her racing heart to slow down. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The flight attendant turned to her, her expression softening. "I'm so sorry about that. Sergeant, can I get you anything before we take off?" Emma shook her head, offering a small smile. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As the plane taxied to the runway, Emma looked out the window, her mind replaying the confrontation. She had faced danger in Iraq, yet somehow this encounter left her more unsettled than any firefight. The engines roared to life, and the plane lifted into the sky, leaving the familiar ground behind. Thoughts of home and her waiting family filled her mind. But the earlier confrontation still lingered. She could almost feel the man's resentment, questioning her right to sit where she was. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, Emma reached into her backpack, pulling out a small notebook and pen. "An idea for mí." Maybe there was a way to turn this negative situation into something meaningful. She began to write, her pen moving swiftly across the page. As the plane leveled off, Emma continued writing, her thoughts pouring out onto the page. She started with a simple greeting, "Dear Sir." Then, She paused, considering her words carefully. This letter wasn't about anger or resentment. It was about understanding. She wanted to share her story, not to make anyone feel guilty or defensive, but to help bridge a gap, however small, between two people from different worlds. Emma wrote about her time in Iraq, the challenges she had faced, and the camaraderie she'd found among soldiers from all walks of life. She described the dusty landscapes and the moments of quiet beauty, like watching the sun rise over the desert after a long night on watch. She thought about her best friend, Carla, who'd saved her life during an ambush in Mosul. Emma knew she wore her uniform not only for herself, but in honor of countless others, each with a story and sacrifice of their own. Lost in thought, Emma didn't notice the flight attendant returning until she gently cleared her throat beside her. "Sergeant Collins," the flight attendant said softly, a smile on her face. "I couldn't help but notice you're writing something. May I ask what it's about?" Emma looked up, surprised by the interruption. She hesitated before responding. "Oh, it's a letter," she explained, "to the gentleman who questioned my seat earlier." The flight attendant raised her eyebrows. "A letter? That's certainly unexpected. May I ask why?" Emma glanced down at her notebook, then looked back at the flight attendant. "I believe there's always room for understanding, even in difficult situations," she said thoughtfully. "I thought maybe if I shared a bit of my story, it might help bridge the gap." The flight attendant nodded, her eyes widening with interest. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you. Sergeant, would you mind sharing a bit of what you've written?" Emma considered it, then nodded slowly. "I've started by explaining who I am and why I'm on this flight. I thought it might help him understand." Before she could say more, the plane suddenly hit a patch of turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign flashed on, and the flight attendant quickly excused herself to check on other passengers. Emma tucked her notebook away, promising herself she'd finish the letter once things settled down. The turbulence intensified, causing the plane to shudder. Emma could hear the anxious murmurs around her, passengers gripping their armrests as the cabin shook. She noticed an elderly woman across the aisle, looking especially distressed. "It's okay, ma'am," Emma said gently, leaning over to reassure her. "Turbulence is normal. It'll pass soon. Just take deep breaths." The woman nodded gratefully, her knuckles white as she clutched her seat. Emma continued to offer quiet words of comfort, not only to the woman, but also to those around her, who looked equally worried. Her calm demeanor seemed to ease some of the tension in the cabin. When the plane finally steadied, Emma caught the eye of the man who had confronted her earlier. He was watching her with a mix of surprise and perhaps grudging respect. She offered him a small nod before returning to her notebook. With a renewed sense of purpose, Emma resumed writing, pouring her thoughts onto the page. She described the pride she felt in wearing her uniform, not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her and broken barriers. Memories flooded back as she wrote, each one a reminder of the sacrifice and resilience she had witnessed. Before she knew it, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their descent into Seattle. Emma finished her letter with a simple invitation for dialogue and understanding. She signed her name at the bottom, then carefully folded the pages and slipped them into an envelope she had gotten from the flight attendant. As the plane began its descent, Emma felt a light tap on her shoulder. She turned to find the elderly woman she had comforted earlier smiling at her. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said warmly. "Your kindness meant a lot to me. Are you heading home?" Emma nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, after 6 months away. I can't wait to see my family." The woman's eyes softened. "Well, I'm sure they'll be overjoyed to have you back. Thank you for your service, dear." As they continued to chat, Emma noticed the man who had questioned her seat watching their interaction. His expression unreadable, but perhaps carrying a glimmer of regret or curiosity. The plane touched down smoothly, and as the other passengers gathered their belongings, Emma took a deep breath and stood up, clutching the envelope containing her letter. She gathered her courage and approached the man's seat just as he was pulling his carry-on bag from the overhead bin. The man tensed as he saw her approach, weariness evident in his posture. "Excuse me, sir," Emma said, her voice steady. "I wanted to give you this." She held out the envelope. The man hesitated, confusion replacing his initial defensiveness. "What is it?" he asked gruffly. "It's a letter," Emma explained. "I thought it might help explain some things. You don't have to read it now, but I hope you will when you have a moment." The man stared at the envelope for a long moment before slowly reaching out to take it. "Thank you," he said, his voice now quiet, lacking its earlier hostility. As the passengers began filing off the plane, the man cleared his throat. "Sergeant Collins," he began, his voice low, "I think I owe you an apology." Emma raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. "Sir?" The man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "My behavior earlier was unacceptable. I made assumptions that I shouldn't have." Emma nodded, acknowledging his words. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we've made a mistake." The man finally met her gaze, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I have a lot to learn, it seems," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "I lost my brother in Iraq." He was a soldier too. The revelation hung in the air between them, a shared understanding of loss and sacrifice bridging the gap that had seemed so wide just hours before. As they moved toward the exit, the man turned to Emma one last time. "Sergeant Collins," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome home." Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal. The encounter had left her with a mix of emotions: hope, sadness, and a renewed sense of purpose. As she made her way through the airport, Emma couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected turn of events. She had boarded the plane expecting a quiet trip home and instead found herself in the midst of a profound human interaction. Lost in thought, she almost missed the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. A voice called out, slightly out of breath, "Sergeant Collins." "Wait!" Emma turned, surprised to see the man from the plane hurrying toward her, his carry-on bag bouncing awkwardly at his side. "I'm glad I caught you," he said as he reached her. I read your letter." Emma's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You read it already? I didn't expect." The man nodded, his expression a mixture of emotions. "I couldn't wait. Your words, they really got to me. I realize now how narrow-minded I've been." Emma studied his face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "I appreciate you telling me that. It's not easy to confront our own biases." "No, it's not," he agreed, running a hand through his graying hair. "But it's necessary. Your letter made me see things from a different perspective." I'd like to buy you a coffee. If you have time, I have some questions. If you're willing to talk." Emma hesitated, glancing at her watch. Her family wouldn't be at the airport for another hour due to traffic. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "All right, I have some time." They made their way to a small coffee shop in the terminal, the bustle of travelers creating a backdrop of white noise. As they settled into a small table with their drinks, the man extended his hand. "I'm Tom," he said, offering a tentative smile. "Tom Parker. I never properly introduced myself on the plane." Emma shook his hand firmly. "Sergeant Emma Collins. It's nice to meet you, Tom." An awkward silence settled between them as they sipped their coffee, each gathering their thoughts. Finally, Tom spoke, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "In your letter, you mentioned your experiences in Iraq," he began slowly. "My brother, Sam, he was stationed there too. He didn't make it home." Emma's expression softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Tom. Losing a fellow soldier is hard enough. I can't imagine losing a brother." Tom nodded, his eyes distant. "It's been years, but some days. It feels like yesterday. When I saw you on the plane, I guess I was angry that you made it back when Sam didn't." "That's understandable," Emma said gently. "Grief can make us react in ways we normally wouldn't." Tom nodded, his face etched with regret. "Your letter, it made me realize how much Sam would have disapproved of my behavior. He always believed in treating people fairly, in judging others by their actions, not appearances." As Tom spoke, Emma saw the pain and remorse in his eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. Emma slid the small photograph across the table. In the picture, a group of soldiers stood side by side, arms around each other's shoulders, their faces dusty but smiling. "This is my unit in Iraq," Emma said. "The woman next to me is Carla. She saved my life during an ambush. The man on the end is Ahmed, our interpreter. He risked everything to help us. We came from different backgrounds, different parts of the world. But out there, none of that mattered. We were family." Tom picked up the photo, his eyes lingering on each face. His expression softened as he studied the men and women, people from different walks of life, united by their desire to serve. He traced the faces with his finger, his expression thoughtful and somber. "Sam used to say something similar in his letters home." Tom murmured, "I guess I never truly understood until now." They sat in silence, the noise of the airport bustling around them. Emma could see the emotional weight in Tom's eyes, the grief he had carried, and the anger he had held on to for so long. It was as though the simple act of looking at her photograph was helping him to release some of that burden. After a moment, Tom cleared his throat. "You know," he began, his voice low, "I spent the last few years angry at the world, blaming everyone for Sam's death. But listening to you, I think I've been dishonoring his memory." Emma leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Your brother gave his life serving his country. The best way to honor him is to live by the values he fought for: equality, justice, compassion." Tom nodded, blinking back tears. "You're right. Sam will want me to do better, to be better." They continued talking, and Emma shared more stories from her deployment. She told Tom about the local children they had helped, the schools they protected, and the bond she had formed with her fellow soldiers. With each story, she could see Tom's perspective shift, his initial assumptions dissolving into something deeper and more understanding. After a while, Tom reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card. "I run a veteran support group," he explained, sliding the card across the table to her. "We focus on helping soldiers readjust to civilian life. We'd be honored if you'd consider joining us sometime. We could use someone like you." Emma took the card, a smile spreading across her face. "I'd like that, Tom. Thank you." As they stood to leave, Tom hesitated, then pulled Emma into a brief, heartfelt hug. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Collins," he said quietly. "And thank you for opening my eyes today." Emma returned the hug, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into a moment of true connection. As they parted ways, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. If this conversation could bridge the gap between her and Tom, perhaps there was hope for healing the larger divides in society. After they said their goodbyes, Emma made her way to the baggage claim area, her mind still processing the day's events. As she waited for her duffel bag to appear on the carousel, she noticed a young girl watching her with wide eyes. The girl, no more than 7 or 8, tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed at Emma. "Mommy, look, she's a soldier." The mother smiled apologetically at Emma. "I'm sorry. She's just excited. She wants to be a soldier when she grows up." Emma knelt down to the girl's level, her heart warming at the child's enthusiasm. "Is that so? Well, it's a big job, but I bet you'd be great at it." The girl beamed, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Did you fight bad guys? Were you scared?" Emma chuckled softly. "Sometimes I was scared. Yes, but being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means doing what's right, even when you are afraid." The girl nodded solemnly, absorbing Emma's words. Her mother watched the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "Thank you for your service," the mother said softly. "And thank you for taking the time to talk to her. It means a lot." Emma rose, offering a warm smile. "It's my pleasure. Your daughter reminds me why I do what I do." As the family moved away, Emma spotted her duffel bag on the carousel. She hefted it onto her shoulder, the familiar weight comforting after the emotional roller coaster of the day. She made her way toward the exit, her heart lightening with each step. Home was just beyond those doors, her family, her own bed, the life she had put on hold for 6 months. It was all waiting for her. As she stepped out into the cool Seattle evening, Emma took a deep breath, the air crisp and filled with the familiar scent of pine and ocean. She scanned the crowd of waiting people, searching for familiar faces. And then she saw them, her parents and her younger brother, all holding a giant welcome home sign decorated with small American flags. Tears pricked at her eyes as she quickened her pace. Her mother was the first to spot her, letting out a joyful cry and rushing forward. In moments, Emma was enveloped in a group hug, surrounded by the warmth and love of her family. As they embraced, Emma felt the last of her tension melt away. She was home, she was safe, and despite the challenges she had faced both on the battlefield and on the plane, she knew that compassion and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Her father pulled back, his eyes shining with pride. "Welcome home, sweetheart. We've missed you so much." Emma smiled, her heart full. "I've missed you too, Dad, more than you know." As they walked to the car, her family peppered her with questions about her flight and her service. Emma found herself hesitating, unsure of how to explain the unexpected encounter with Tom. Her mother, ever perceptive, noticed her hesitation. "Is everything okay, honey? Did something happen on the flight?" Emma took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. "Actually, Mom, something did happen. Something unexpected." Her mother's brow furrowed in concern. "What do you mean, honey? Was there trouble on the plane?" Emma shook her head, a small smile on her lips. "No, not trouble exactly. It's a bit of a long story." Her father chimed in, his arm around her shoulders. "We got plenty of time. Sweetheart, why don't you tell us about it on the drive home?" As they piled into the family car, Emma began to recount the events of the flight. Her family listened intently, their expressions shifting from concern to surprise to pride as she described her encounter with Tom and the letter she had written. "Oh, Emma," her mother said, twisting in her seat to look at her daughter. "I'm so proud of how you handled that situation. It couldn't have been easy." Emma shrugged, feeling a mix of emotions. "It wasn't, at first, but then I remembered something my commanding officer used to say. The greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of people." Her younger brother, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. "So, did you punch the guy?" "Tyler," their mother admonished. But Emma just laughed. "No, little bro, I didn't punch him. Sometimes, words are more powerful than fists." As they drove through the familiar streets of their hometown, Emma found herself seeing everything with new eyes. The local diner where she'd spent countless hours with friends. The park where she'd learned to ride a bike. The recruitment office where she'd first signed up for the military. All of it felt both comfortingly familiar and strangely new. "We kept your room just as you left it," her father said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "Though your mother might have dusted a bit." Emma smiled, grateful for the normalcy of it all. After months of military precision and the intensity of deployment, the thought of her childhood bedroom was incredibly appealing. As they pulled into the driveway of their modest two-story home, Emma felt a lump form in her throat. A banner hung from the porch reading, "Welcome Home." Sergeant Collins. Red, white, and blue balloons bobbed gently in the breeze. "Surprise!" her family chorused as they got out of the car. Emma blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. As she walked up the familiar path to the front door, memories flooded back, running down this same path as a child, leaving for basic training with a mix of excitement and fear. The tearful goodbyes before each deployment. Inside, the house smelled of home-cooked food and the faint scent of her mother's favorite candles. Emma dropped her duffel bag by the door and took a deep breath, letting the familiarity wash over her. "Are you hungry, honey?" her mother asked, already heading toward the kitchen. "I made all your favorites." Emma's stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the meager airplane meal. "Starving," she admitted with a grin. As they settled around the dining room table, plates of comforting, home-cooked food were set before them. Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The simple act of sharing a meal with her family, something she'd dreamed about during long nights in Iraq, felt almost surreal. Between bites of her mother's famous pot roast, Emma found herself sharing more stories from her deployment. She told them about the friends she'd made, the challenges she'd faced, and the moments of unexpected beauty she'd encountered in a land so far from home. Her family listened attentively, asking questions and offering words of support. Even Tyler, usually more interested in his video games than family conversations, seemed captivated by his sister's tales. As the meal wound down, Emma's father cleared his throat, his expression turning serious. "Emma, honey, there's something we need to talk about." Emma felt a flicker of concern. "What is it, Dad?" He exchanged a glance with her mother before continuing. "You remember Mr. Hansen from down the street? He owns that security firm?" Emma nodded, unsure where this was going. "Well," her father said, "he approached us a few weeks ago. He's looking to hire veterans for his company, and he specifically asked about you. Said he'd be honored to have you on his team." Emma blinked, surprised. "But I just got home. I haven't even decided if I'm going to re-enlist or not." Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We know. Honey, we're not trying to pressure you. We just wanted you to know that there are opportunities here if you decide you want to come home for good." Emma nodded slowly, her mind whirling with possibilities. The thought of a stable job close to home was tempting, but so was the idea of continuing her military career. She had worked hard to reach the rank of sergeant, and there was still so much she felt she could contribute. "Thanks for telling me," she said finally. "I'll definitely think about it." After dinner, they moved to the living room, chatting and reminiscing about her childhood. Emma listened to her family's stories, laughing along with them, but her mind wandered back to the day's events, especially her unexpected encounter with Tom. She excused herself after a while, stepping out onto the back porch to take a moment alone. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the backyard. After a few minutes, she heard the screen door open behind her. Her mother stepped out, wrapping a soft, warm sweater around Emma's shoulders. "Penny for your thoughts?" her mother asked gently. Emma smiled, grateful for her mother's intuition. "Just thinking about everything. It's a lot to take in." Her mother nodded, standing beside her and looking out at the sunset. "J'en only imagine. You've been through so much, seen things we can't even begin to understand." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before her mother spoke again. "You know, when you first told us you were joining the military, I was terrified. I didn't want my little girl in harm's way." Emma turned to look at her mother, seeing a mix of pride and worry in her eyes. "But watching you today," her mother continued, "hearing about how you handled that situation on the plane, I realized something. You're not just my little girl anymore. You're a strong, compassionate woman who's making a real difference in the world." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. She wrapped her arms around her mother, holding her tight. "Thanks, Mom. That means more than you know." As they embraced, Emma felt a sense of clarity begin to settle over her. The path ahead might not be clear yet, but she knew she had the strength and support to face whatever challenges came her way. Later that night, as Emma lay in her childhood bed, she stared up at the ceiling, her mind racing. Despite the emotional roller coaster of the day, she felt a growing sense of excitement within her. Whatever path she chose, re-enlisting, working with Mr. Hansen's security firm, or something entirely different, she knew her experiences had equipped her to make a meaningful difference. The weeks passed quickly as Emma settled into her routine at home. She helped around the house, caught up with old friends, and attended a few local events. During this time, she also joined Tom's veteran support group, sharing her experiences with other veterans and learning from theirs in return. The support group meetings became something she looked forward to. Each story shared, each perspective offered, helped Emma feel more connected to her community and her purpose. One day, at a community center event, she found herself at a podium in front of a packed room. Veterans, students, community leaders, and everyday citizens filled the space, all eager to hear her story. "Good afternoon, everyone," Emma began, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Emma Collins, and I'm here to talk about building bridges. Not the kind that span rivers, but the kind that connect hearts and minds." She spoke about her journey from Iraq to the encounter with Tom on the plane, about the power of understanding and the courage it took to confront one's own biases. As she shared her story, she could see the impact her words were having. People leaned forward, nodding in understanding, some wiping away tears. She finished with a simple, heartfelt message. When we build these bridges, she concluded, we create a world where understanding replaces fear, where compassion overcomes prejudice, and where we recognize the humanity in each other, regardless of our differences. As applause filled the room, Emma felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was her new mission, continuing to serve her community and country by fostering understanding, one conversation at a time. That evening, as she sat on her back porch watching the sun set, her phone buzzed with a text from Tom. Great speech today. Sam would have loved it. Emma smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She thought of all the lives she'd touched, the minds she'd opened, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Angie Emma Qualis, bridge builder and peacemaker, took a deep breath. The path ahead was clear, filled with purpose and possibility, and she was ready to meet it head-on, one conversation, one bridge, one transformed heart at a time.